The Meike 12mm T2.2 is the latest release in Meike's ever-expanding range of cinema lenses. Budgeted at £399.99, this lens is available only on Micro Four Thirds. Surely with a lens at this price point there has to be some serious compromise, whether that's in optical performance, build quality, chromatic aberration, focus breathing. At TstopGear we were lucky enough to get our hands on one of these lenses, and we spent the last few weeks doing some test shooting, and we've been quite impressed. With a cinema lens at this price point, you'd expect something plasticky or cheap, but the first thing you notice when you get hold of a Meike lens is just how well made they are. It comes with the standard caps, rear Micro Four Thirds cap, and on the front, a nice snap-on cap. It's about 586 grams, it's all metal. If there's one word I'd use to describe this lens's build quality, it's solid. The focus ring and the aperture are both geared for cinema use and are silky smooth. Focus marks are in meters and in feet, and they're perfect if you're a single operator or if you're using an assistant camera. It has a very long throw, which might be off-putting for some people who come from using DSLRs, but this makes it perfect for cinema and video use. Another nice feature is the built-in lens hood. This is very useful if you're doing quick lens changes because it's going to be very hard to contaminate the lens accidentally with fingerprints. The filter thread on the lens is 77mm, which means if you aren't using a matte box, there are plenty of screen filter options available. In terms of close focusing, you can place this lens about 25 centimeters from the subject, which means there's going to be very few scenarios where you're going to need to take this lens off in a busy shoot day. That means you can shoot a lot quicker and more efficiently. And because it's low distortion, they're not going to look funky unless you put something right into the camera. Being a 12mm, this isn't a bokeh monster. But thanks to close focusing, if you place an object or a person close to the lens, it's possible to get some very pleasing pull focuses. The bokeh at wide apertures is reasonably milky and bright, while not being too busy. Wide open, you will notice there is some smearing towards the edge of frame in unfocused areas, but this is noticeably less as you stop the lens down. Even when present, this is not unattractive and gives the lens some much needed character. Focus breathing is very well controlled, and while the transitions between the focus are not the most attractive I've seen, they are smooth and clean. This being a cinema lens, the aperture is weighted towards the top end of the scale, so from T2.2 to 5.6. This is where you're going to want to use the lens most of the time. Here the lens is sharp and has got great resolution. When you drop the aperture to between T8 and T22, it's a tiny bit softer, there's a little bit drop of resolution. Not terrible, but enough to make you want to stick within this scale wherever possible. I'd say it's very usable at T2.2, but when you stop down to T2.8, there is a noticeable increase in sharpness. The dampening on the aperture ring is fantastic, so if you need to do an iris change during shooting, the transitions are going to be very smooth and clean. Being a 12mm, this lens is not without distortion, but what distortion there is amazingly well controlled. One thing we did very intentionally during our testing was put the camera in positions where there were lampposts or trees very close to camera or to the edge of frame. We wanted to see what distortion would be visible in real-world scenarios, and the answer is very little. One of the limitations with these lenses is that they're designed only for Micro Four Thirds, so there's no point in buying this lens if you're intending to update to a large format sensor or an EF mount camera in the near future. Being a modern lens with modern coatings, this gives a very clean and clear image. If like me you come from using a lot of vintage glass, this will give probably far cleaner look than you're used to. That said, with a little bit of grading you can add some character back into the lens. We did some side-by-side tests using our vintage Zeiss wide angles, and we got a pretty good match. But straight out of the box, this is going to be a very clean and a very crisp modern image. If you really go pixel peeping with this lens, you will notice some minor chromatic aberration, but you really have to go looking for it. We intentionally shot a lot of our tests with very harsh backlight just to see how this lens would perform, and in 99% of the shots we did, there is no visible chromatic aberration, even in very high contrast areas. If you go looking for it, you may find some, but we were very impressed with the chromatic aberration performance, especially on a lens of this price point and with this field of view. Flaring on this lens is very well controlled, as you'd expect from a modern multi-coated lens. Blooming on light sources is minimal. A light source aimed directly into the lens produces a circular flare towards the edge of frame. While the flares are not as sexy and as complex as is possible with vintage glass, they are more than attractive enough to be used creatively on camera. While the flares on older glass is often an unwanted byproduct, using the Meike you will have to intentionally force the flares using very direct light sources. There are faster lenses on the market in the T1.8 range. This lens is a 2.2, but it is very usable at 2.2. It gets better at 2.8, but it does give you that extra stop if you need it. We did some night shooting outside, just a few sort of tests to see how it worked in very low light conditions, and it gave a remarkably bright and clean image. One of the most compelling reasons to get this lens is because it's not a one-off. This is part of a series of cinema lenses. Meike already has a 16 and a 25 on the market. This will give a great wide-angle lens to work alongside those, and then later in the year they're releasing a 35, a 50 and an 85. They will all have identical positioning for the focus and the aperture rings, which means operationally they'll be much quicker and more efficient to use on a busy set. This means by the end of the year, Meike will have one of the best micro four thirds cinema lens ranges on the market. For a budget cinema lens, this produces excellent results. No, I take that back. At twice the price, this would still be considered a fantastic lens and great value for money. While no one should expect the same kind of results as you get with a Cooke or a Zeiss, the images this lens produces are very clean, clear, and once you've used it for a day or so, you will know exactly the kind of images that you can get from this lens. So unlike a vintage lens which might occasionally surprise you with a weird and wonderful effect, the results this lens gives you are amazingly consistent. When we first got the lens, we did ask ourselves, would we be happy going out and filming a professional client job using a £399 99 cinema lens? I mean, a lot of the lenses we use day to day cost 3, 4, 5 times that amount. In fact, I've actually got adapters that cost more than this lens does. So, would we use it on a client job? Yes. In fact, we already have. And they loved it.